Does Kerry have an inner monologue? Let me ask a more general question. Do you have an inner monologue? A kind of voice in your head as you go about your day? I need to buy cheese. Is cheese really mold? Oof, there's some mold on the tiles. How do I clean that? Vinegar? Does vinegar clean mold? Baking soda? Do I even have baking soda? I need to make another shopping trip. People have really strong opinions on this, and there are lots of debates online. Many psychologists think we always have a voice in our head. But this is false. It's based on very shaky evidence. And in this video, I'm going to go through evidence with one woman, Kerry, and also talk about more evidence coming from a research method called descriptive experience sampling, or DES.
I think the concept of me being so confident, oh, I know myself so well, and this is how my brain operates. I have an inner monologue, and I'm going to sign up for this because I'm a perfect person with an inner monologue. And then being proven wrong about my own brain, I would say I'm more skeptical of myself, but in a healthy way, The
problem with experience research is that our minds can play tricks on us. It's very hard to know what's actually going on. There are all kinds of studies showing cognitive biases and false memories that make researching experience really difficult. I'm going to list one of these problems. It's called the fridge light phenomenon. Say you're going about your day, you're watering your plants, you're not thinking in sentences or words, you're just watching the light catch in the droplets of water. And then you start thinking, what's my thinking like? Is it in words? Well, now it's in words. Yeah, I always think in words. I'm always talking to myself. You just erased all the time you weren't talking to yourself, but were watching the light catch in the droplets of water. This is kind of like if you think the light in your fridge is always on, because whenever you open the fridge, it's on. You don't even notice all the time that the fridge is closed and the light is off. This is probably what tripped up some of the psychologists that say we always have a voice in our head. But it's hard to know. There are a lot of cognitive biases. In fact, go back to that original question I asked. Do you think in words? Do you have an inner monologue? You might have a firm answer, but you could very likely be wrong. It's so hard to know what's actually going on in our minds. In fact, as we did this research with Kerry, she was surprised. She thought she always had an inner monologue, a voice in her head, but as it went on, this is what she said about one of the sampling days.
I was kind of taken aback at how visual all of these beeps were.
So Kerry thought she mostly or always had an inner voice, but this was not the case. In fact, mostly she was innerly seeing things, so imagining scenes with very clear detail. So let's go into how we figured this out. Descriptive experience sampling tries to fight the tricks of our experience by using a beeper. So we look at experience for very short periods of time. So the beeper has an earpiece that goes in one ear, and participants carry it as they go about their daily lives. Maybe they're folding laundry or watching TV, commuting to work, or eating out with friends. The beeper delivers random beeps, spaced apart from 1 minute to an hour, and after each beep, the participant has to jot down whatever was in their experience directly before the beep. Really caught by the beep in the last millisecond before it. So if you're living your life, and then the beep comes, then you turn it off, we want what was caught directly by the beep. And usually that means a moment that's very short. This is really hard to do, and alone it's not enough to figure out what's an experience. So we need to interview participants. Within a day of them collecting around 6 beeps, we have an interview that lasts for an hour, and we ask all kinds of questions about what was in their experience. We don't blindly accept their answers, but we work together with them to try to figure out what was going on. So who's we? It's Russell Hurlburt, who invented this method and has been perfecting it since the 70s. It's me, who is a fan of Hurlburt's work. I read all his books, and I emailed him, and eventually we ended up working together. I'm not super experienced with this method, so a lot of our project was Hurlburt telling me exactly what I was doing wrong. And if you're curious about more of the method, you can look at our transcripts of the interviews, and there are very detailed conversations about mistakes I made and how best to look at experience. And then there's Mel, who we did a past project with, where we were interviewing her about her experience. And then we asked her if she wanted to come on the other side and be an interviewer so she could learn more about the method. And together, we're all interviewing Kerry, trying to figure out her experience. And Kerry and us, we're all co-investigators working together to try to figure out this thing that's actually pretty darn difficult. This might all be very confusing, so let's look at an easy sample from DES. This is actually an example of Kerry inner speaking. I'm not saying she never was inner speaking, just it wasn't the most common type of her experience. The sample is from the 7th day of interviewing, and Kerry is editing a restaurant menu. She's a graphic designer. I'll let Kerry take it from here.
And in my head, I was saying we have maxed out our edits on this one, which basically, again, going back to me, like rehearsing things that I'm potentially going to say to this client. There was no visual to go along with this. It was purely just me looking at my screen, working on the edits, and then saying we have maxed out our edits on this one.
So this was the 7th day of interviewing, so Kerry was pretty skilled. She was able to tell us she had a voice in her head. She was innerly speaking. She was saying we've maxed out our edits on this one, and it was her normal pitch and cadence. There were a few other things we needed to find out. For instance, she's editing, she's working on her computer, but is this actually in her direct experience? So here's Russ asking that question.
And do you see the screen, or is it the case that your eyeballs are aimed at the screen and your attention's all on the imaginary conversation?
I think it's not really part of my experience. I'm just mindlessly working. I'm not even confident that I was working on the wine list. I could have been working on a different menu. Yeah, I was definitely more focused on the words.
So we figured out that no, she's not directly experiencing her computer and the edits she's making. She's doing it skillfully. Her eyes are pointed at it. Her neurons are processing it, but that's not directly in her experience. So the only thing that's there is saying we've maxed out our edits on this one. Well, innerly saying it in her mind. She's not actually out loud saying that. That's the voice in her head, as you might call it. So that was a pretty simple sample, but it takes a lot of work to get there. So now let's go to the very first sample from the first day, and we can see why experience is messy and it's hard to really apprehend it. And we'll see why we might think we were innerly speaking to ourselves when maybe that's not the case. So I started off with a pretty broad prompt just to get Kerry to start talking about her experience. And now we can get into the first beep of the first day.
Yeah, we started off with a bit of a bang because I got a really bad bloody nose on the first beep. Which was super random. I grew up getting bloody noses, and I, since moving out west, have gotten more because of the dry air. But anyway, so in that moment, as she was saying that to me, what I was hearing in my head was my own voice asking questions of why this might have happened. So, am I dehydrated? Am I not drinking enough water? Is this because I'm running more? Or am I nervous / stressed about this evening because I was going to meet new people that evening? Or maybe it's because of how hot the water was on my face. All these thoughts were kind of just going through, but I'm hearing them sort of conversationally in my own voice. Visuals, nothing in my mind. And then physical was a bloody nose. So that's where I started.
So compare this description so far to the previous one. That one was very simple. Kerry was innerly speaking. We've maxed out our edits on this one. There was nothing else directly in experience. Even though her eyes were pointed at her laptop, her focus was much more on innerly speaking. So in this one, by contrast, she lists a bunch of different things. Maybe I'm dehydrated. Maybe I'm running too much. So the goal now is to try to figure out if all that is really right before the beep, or maybe she's talking about things that occurred over the previous minute, the previous 10 seconds. And we really want to get to the specifics of what was caught by the beep. So we still have a lot of options of what could be before, directly before the beep at this moment. So I'm going to list possibilities, but it could be something else entirely. And you mentioned a lot of them, like dehydrated, running too much, meeting new people, and nervous. Mm-hmm. Are these all right before the beep in the very first millisecond? And they could all be there, or it could be one of these things more specifically you mentioned, or it could be something else.
I think the actual moment of the beep was, it cut my friend Amy off mid-sentence where she was saying, I typically get them when it's really dry out.
So this seems like it's about inner experience. Her friend is talking. I typically get them when it's really dry out. But we don't actually know if this is experienced yet. It's possible that this is just a fact of nature, a fact of the universe. Her friend is talking, but Kerry's focus is elsewhere. Kerry is running through possibilities in her mind. And you might have had an experience similar to this. Maybe you're talking to a friend blah, blah, blah. They're talking, but your own mind is off somewhere completely different. Maybe you're thinking about which video game you're going to play when you get home. Maybe you're thinking about a dog you saw on the street that looked cute. I don't know, something completely random. And then maybe your friend catches you and says, hey, weren't you paying attention to me? And then you actually can say, oh yeah, you said blah, blah, blah. So you were processing it, your ears were taking it in, but it wasn't directly in your experience. But yet when they ask you about it, you can go back and say, oh yeah, you said this and that. And whew, I'm off the hook. My friend doesn't know I was thinking about completely random shit. So this could be the case here. Kerry's roommate is talking, the beep comes, Kerry writes down what her roommate was saying because she was processing it, she was taking it in, but her inner experience was actually completely different. So one of the tasks is to try to separate what's occurring in the real world from what's occurring in our minds. So keep in mind that Kerry is not yet talking about experience at this moment. Or she could be, but we don't know that yet. So I'll skip ahead a little bit, and Kerry does go to try to pinpoint what exactly is in her mind right at the beep.
Probably the dehydration one, because she was mentioning dry. So I feel like in that moment I would have been like, okay. But I was kind of rapidly cycling through all these.
So Kerry says probably the dehydrated thought, but we have to be careful here because Kerry seems very uncertain. And also she gives causal explanations. So she's not directly reporting her experience, but she's saying, oh, probably because my roommate said this, I was thinking that. So in DES, we're very wary of causal explanations and also general context, as I said, and people's theories about their own experience. So here's an example later in the interview where Kerry gives a theory about her inner speaking.
I don't speak very loudly generally, so I think the voice in my head sort of mimics that.
So this is Kerry's theory about her inner speaking, and it could be true, we can't say, but keep in mind that it's not about some direct sample from DES, it's just her generalizing and thinking about what her inner monologue is like. So in the end, we didn't pin down the sample. Kerry listed 6 or 7 different things that could be going on: dehydrated, running too much, nervous about meeting people, the physical bloody nose, hearing her roommate talk, but we couldn't pinpoint what exactly was right before the beep. Now, it could be all of these. There are people, and DES has found this in research, that can have highly multiple experience with lots of different things going on at the same time. It's very rare. So we have to be wary on the first sampling day, and the first sampling day is always considered training. So DES is really always about the next day. So every question is aimed not just on figuring out that experience, but on training the interviewee, training ourselves, so that on the next day we can better figure out what's going on. So we were never sure if Kerry was actually inner speaking at all. She could have been, but this could very well have just been her self-theory about her experience, that she always has some inner monologue. As sampling went on, we found that this was very much not true. Kerry was mostly innerly seeing things. So let's go to a sample from the second day of interviewing. So this is the first sample from the second day. Kerry wore the beeper, she got random beeps as she went about her day, and then we had an interview about them.
I was on a hike with my housemate, and I was in the middle of telling a story about my dad, how we used to hike together. He used to hold out starbursts and walk like 5 feet in front of me. So I was telling this story, and I was in the middle of the sentence. I wouldn't even eat them because I was too slow. And then it sort of cut the story off when the beep happened. So as I was telling this story, I was visualizing my dad in front of me. He was younger and kind of looked how he looked when I was maybe 5 or 6. He was wearing the old hiking gear that we used to have as a family from like the 90s. And he was holding the starburst out in front of me. And the scene around him was really green, kind of like sheltered, and sort of like a rocky, rooty path in front of him.
Notice that Kerry here is much more in contact with her experience. There are fewer hesitations, there's much less backstory. She does start with some context, and we have to figure out if that's context or if it's directly experienced. But as she goes on talking, she's clearly talking about her direct experience of that moment. So we know that Kerry is innerly seeing her dad. Her dad's not actually there in front of her holding a starburst. She's with her roommate hiking, but she's innerly seeing him. So there are a few more details we want to know about the sample. So here's a question that came later on. Do you see yourself, or is it as if it's from your point of view?
It's from my point of view, so I don't see myself.
So it's from Kerry's point of view. She sees her dad with a starburst. And here's my little recreation. Well, it's not really a recreation. It's just to give you an idea. But of course, I am not Kerry's dad. And this is not even a starburst because I couldn't find them where I live in Vienna. And also, we still need to figure out what seeing her dad is actually like. Is it a full scene that encompasses her? Is it like she's looking at a photograph in front of her? There are all kinds of possibilities. So here's a question I asked, trying to get at more detail. It's a very broad question, and part of Kerry's response does seem like she's talking about direct experience, but part of it, me and Russ really weren't sure, and we were very skeptical of it. So as you listen to the answer, try to figure out Kerry's experience for yourself. Is there more you could say about the scene? You already gave a lot of detail, but is there more?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of hard to describe both taking in my surroundings, like the present surrounding, and then also visualizing the scene. But it almost feels like I'm looking at like a blurry photograph kind of in front of me. So it's like a smaller scene, but it's very detailed. My dad's walking. I can see his arm outstretched behind him. It's actually his left arm outstretched behind him, holding a pink starburst. I can see the trees moving, like leaves blowing in a light wind. And my dad's kind of smiling. I can see his old glasses that he used to wear when I was a kid that he doesn't wear anymore.
So the second part of Kerry's description does seem like it's about direct experience. She says the scene is detailed, and she gives a lot of that detail. The hiking gear he wore, the smile on his face. It does seem like she's directly apprehending what was in her experience. But the first part seems a bit off. She talks about the scene being blurry, but in the second half, it sounds very detailed. So going off the first half, we go from picturing this as a full scene that surrounds her to more like a photograph that's in front of her, and on top of that, it's blurry. Now, me and Russ don't think that's true, and part of DES is skepticism. We don't trust everything that interviewees tell us, and we try to tell them why we're skeptical and work together to figure things out. So we think a problem could come from Kerry mixing up what her experience is with what her physical actuality is, that she's hiking on a trail and her eyes are taking in what's in front of her. So here's Russ trying to clarify that.
I want to make sure that we don't presume that we're seeing the real world, that it's there experientially.
Yeah.
So you're clearly walking down the path. There's no question about that. You're not tripping over the roots, and you're not running into your housemate and whatever. So there's no question about your eyeballs are processing this material, and your brain is processing it, and your limbs are processing, and you're doing all that stuff. You're not falling
Correct.
down. But that does not mean that it's in your experience. You can walk or drive or whatever and have that processing be taking place automatically. Or it could be that it is in your experience. What I don't want us to do is to presume that it has to be in my experience because my eyes are open.
So Russ's speech wasn't so much aimed at trying to figure out this day, but prepare us for the next day. So on the next day, Kerry will be able to better separate what's occurring in her physical reality and what's in her inner experience. I mean, it could be both. She could be both directly experiencing the trail and her innerly seeing her dad, or it could just be one. But I moved on too fast. I wanted to find out more details on Kerry's inner seeing. Russ criticized me for this, and you can read it in the transcripts. It's kind of fun, these transcripts. It's like seeing a judo master ippon a student. Russ goes in pretty hard sometimes. But anyways, I asked more about Kerry's mental image, and sorry, it's not a mental image, it's inner seeing. So we try not to say mental image in DES because it can confuse that there's a separation between you and what you're seeing. And in inner experience, that's not the case necessarily. So it's things like that that probably got Kerry confused, maybe in this sample, maybe in others. So that made it difficult for Kerry to report on her experience. But anyways, I kept trying to get details of Kerry's inner seeing her dad. And later in the interview, this is what she said.
I don't know if this helps to describe, but imagine on the trail I'm physically on, if I took a photo of that and then I took a smaller photo of my dad and put that smaller photo on top of the big photo, the trails lined up. So it was like right where the trail was narrowing in my physical surroundings is where the trail picked up with my dad. So there was a little bit of distance between us, but it almost like bled in to the trail that I was physically on.
So going off this description, it's not a full scene that surrounds her, that's immersive. It's more like a photograph or a video in front of her. And on top of that, it's overlaid on what she's actually seeing. So it's overlaid on the real trail, and the trails line up. The trail in the inner seeing lines up with the real world trail. So I was pretty convinced of this, but Russ said he doesn't trust any of it, that until we can make distinctions between physically occurring and what's occurring in inner experience, we can't trust any of these details. And this is only the second day, so as we progress, we'll be able to find out more about Kerry. So on the third day of sampling, Kerry was surprised by how many inner seeing she had, how visual her mind was. And that's the really cool thing about this method, is that people almost always are surprised by what it reveals. They don't actually know what's in their own minds on a very moment-to-moment basis. We're just not used to looking at experience at the scale. Even though it's the scale we're always living in, it's invisible to us, kind of like a fish swimming around and not knowing what water is. So here's Kerry talking about her surprise, and then Russ's answer to it, which I think reveals a lot about the method.
I was kind of taken aback at how visual all of these beeps were, because normally it's a lot of audio going on in my brain, but this morning it was almost exclusively visual, which is very interesting. I don't know why.
So what I would say about that is, yes, I agree that it's interesting, and it could very well be that you've got more visual stuff going on than you thought. So you're mistaken about thinking that you're always audio, or it could be that this was an unusual day, and for whatever reason that today was a visual day. And all of those things would be equally interesting to me. I don't favor one of those approaches, or one of those results over the other. What's interesting to me is to try to get each individual one right. Right. And then after we've sampled for half a dozen days or whatever, then we can go back and say, well, I do have a lot of visual stuff. Or we could say, well, that was a crazy day. I had a lot of visual stuff then, but I don't have any visual stuff any other. We'll have the data about that. Right. As opposed to what I call a faux generalization, what seems like a reasonable story about myself. And so I would like us to set all those things aside. My technical term for that is to bracket that, to put all those theories that I'm an audio person. Well, maybe I am, but let's put that in brackets, which means let's not go looking for it. Let's not try to color our actual experience with some expectation about that. That's what I mean by put that stuff in brackets. Mm-hmm.
So this bracketing is the heart of our exploration of consciousness. We want to take all these self-theories, oh, I'm always talking to myself, oh, I'm always feeling emotions, and really just toss them aside, at least for the moment. And the same goes for all theories from psychologists or philosophers about experience. We want to leave all that behind, both as interviewers, and we want to encourage interviewees to do the same. Because really most of that stuff and most of psychology actually ends up not being true when you look at experience at a moment-to-moment basis. And that's something I want to get into more as I make more videos about this. Speaking of which, I'm running out of time to edit these videos before I have to get another job. So I have one more that's almost ready, but then I made a fundraiser to try to make at least two more. Topics like DDS results in bulimia and mental health, depression. There's so much interesting stuff, and I really want to bring it to you guys outside of the paywalls of academia. So yeah, link below. But let's move on now to another sample from Kerry. So this one's on the fourth day. She wore the beeper again. The beeps went off randomly as she went about her life. After each beep, she jotted down her experience of right before the beep, and then we interviewed about it. So this is the fifth sample from the fourth day. Kerry gave some background first. She was talking to her sister about a potential hike she might take. And then her sister was saying there's so many bugs, you could get eaten alive there. And then Kerry went on to talk about her direct experience.
I was visualizing a hike that I've never been on, but I've seen a lot of photos of, called Lake of the Crags. And I was hearing my voice saying we could wear bug nets.
Okay. So visualizing the hike and hearing your voice, we need to wear bug nets?
Yes. So in like the
80-20. So Kerry is innerly seeing the scene of the hike, and she's innerly speaking. We could wear bug nets. So I asked about percentages to figure out how much of one, how much of the other. I said 80-20, 50-50. And here's her answer to that.
I would say like 60-40 or 70-30 leaning towards the visual. And then my voice was kind of in the background, but the visual was pretty detailed. So I think more focus on the visual.
So we don't really care about exact percentages, but it's a good way to get people in contact with their experience and focusing on what was most present and what was maybe background. And then my next question is to find out more detail on what exactly she does see. And what do you see?
I see the mountains as I imagine them. So it's rocky. There's a little bit of wet snow left over from winter. There's a lake to my left and like really overgrown grass in my immediate foreground, and kind of less in focus. Like the overgrown grass was like the most in focus, and then a little bit less in focus to my right was a couple of like tents.
So here's my pretty shitty rendering. Guys, I really tried, but okay, there are mountains in the background. There's supposed to be wet snow. There's a lake to the left. There are tall grasses, and there's more than one tent. But that's what she's seeing. Yeah, and actually my tent was broken, so this is what it looks like from the side. Anyways, you might do better in your own imagination. But there's still things I wanted to figure out. And it's more like a full scene, or more like just a photograph with borders or something else?
This was, I would say, like the most expansive, or like the largest scene that I think I've visualized since starting this. Most, I think I've described sort of like blurry edges, whereas this was like to the edge of my periphery.
Okay. So kind of as if you're actually just there?
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
Okay.
But also aware that I'm not there.
So you're aware that you're not there. You're not hallucinating. But as far as you're concerned, it's like being there?
Yeah.
So Russ had some criticism saying it's actually like being there is too far. We can't say that much, but we can say that it's a full scene, it's immersive, and it visually surrounds her. Now we could get all this detail because of the careful training. This is the 4th day, and we went through days of really trying to separate experience from context, trying to separate experience from whatever is physically happening. Just because her eyes are pointed at maybe her sister doesn't mean that's directly in her experience. And here, even though she is probably looking at her sister, that isn't her experience. Her experience is the scene, the grass, the tents, the mountains, all of that. So this isn't to say that her experience of the dad and the starburst must have been a full scene and that all of Kerry's inner scenes were full scenes. No, in DES you can only go forwards, you can't go back. But because we did this careful training, we can be pretty confident of this sample. So I mentioned that there was inner speaking, so let's get back to that. You're innerly speaking, we need to hear bug nets, or you're hearing this, or what's that part like?
I am innerly speaking in sort of like a positive tone. I was sort of, this voice is the voice I was sort of imagining myself saying it to friends, being like, we'll be fine, like we can wear bug nets, like very positive tone, but it was in my voice inside my head.
So I asked if she was innerly speaking it or if it was more like hearing it. And this can be a distinction for a lot of people. It's kind of like if you're speaking into a tape recorder and say, we could wear bug nets. Or if you're kind of hearing it in your head played back, we could wear bug nets. So here she said it was more like inner speaking, and she gave details on that. It was a positive, cheery tone. It was her voice. So I'm not saying that Kerry's inner speaking isn't interesting, and if I have time, I want to make another video just on that and the different ways it can manifest. But if we really want to describe Kerry, we have to describe her inner seeing, because that's the main type of her experience. And in fact, after we did 9 days of interviewing, we took all the samples and we analyzed them, and we found that 25% for sure were inner speaking, although some were uncertain, so the average is more like 32%. But for inner seeing, 47% were clearly inner seeing, so 19 samples out of 40 total. And we can even ask, how does this compare to everybody else? So there's a study of DES looking at 30 college students and looking at all of their samples of experience. And that study found that the average for inner speaking was 26% of samples. So not that 26% of people could innerly speak, but that of all the samples collected for all the students, 26% of them were for inner speaking. And it found that for inner seeing, the average is 34%. So out of all the samples collected, 34% were of inner seeing. So Kerry's samples are pretty in line with the average for inner speaking, but they are above the average for inner seeing. But keep in mind that the range between people is huge. So for some people, none of their samples, they were innerly speaking, and for some people, it went up to 75% of their samples. And this is just a study of 30 students. Some people might actually innerly speak all of the time. For inner seeing, the range also went from 0, so some people never innerly saw anything, to 90% of the time. And in other studies, like a DES study of 3 people with autism, they were innerly seeing 100% of the time. So the main takeaway is that the variability between people is huge. We're all so different. Some of us actually might be talking to ourselves or having an inner monologue for most of our lives. Some people, it's none of the time. A lot of people, when they talk about an inner monologue, they just mean whatever is going on in their mind. They don't actually mean a voice saying something specific. But for some people, it is a voice, a very clear voice that they can hear, or maybe it's more like they're speaking it. Basically, we're so different from each other and we don't know it. The psychologists that say our thinking is always like this or like that are wrong. And the beauty of experience is how different we all are. For Kerry, we saw that the most frequent type of experience for her was inner seeing. She had clear, detailed inner seeings. We saw her dad on a trail holding a starburst. We saw the camping ground with the tall grass that was full of bugs. Actually, in her inner seeing, there were no bugs, but there was the grass. So I want to make a series of these videos because there's so much to say about experience. In my next one, I want to talk about Kerry's inner seeings in more detail. We only went up to the 4th day of sampling, and we found some pretty interesting things throughout. Basically, I'll give you a little spoiler. Kerry innerly saw things that in real life would be completely impossible. So that's the next video. You can stay tuned for that one. And thanks for watching.